Welcome to the Aviation Insurance Podcast, the podcast that helps aircraft owners and aviation businesses learn and understand the complex world of aviation insurance and risk management. From the basic principles of aviation insurance to risk management techniques and updates on the aviation insurance market, the Aviation Insurance Podcast is your guide to traverse the world of aviation insurance. Now, here's your host, Tim Bonnell.
Well, welcome to the Aviation Insurance Podcast, where we've been discussing the fundamentals of aviation insurance. And we've talked about aircraft insurance policies. We've talked about airport or aviation commercial general liabilities policies. And within those discussions, we talked about a lot of exclusions. And we said these exclusions are often here because those issues are better designed to be covered elsewhere. And one of those is that exclusion to employees acting in the scope of their employment. And the reason is because workers' compensation is the sole remedy for those type of losses. So today, we want to talk a little bit about workers' compensation. And workers' compensation is, again, a vast issue. There's a lot of information, and more importantly, it is actually governed by each state. Each state has its own set of rules and regulations. There are a couple of national acts or legislation that contribute to it, but workers' compensation is highly regulated. It's done by each state. And so each thing we kind of discuss really depends on the state to a certain extent, but it is a no-fault system, meaning it's not a liability. An employer does not have to be proved negligent in order for workers' compensation to respond. As a result, it is the exclusive remedy to injuries to employees while they're acting in their scope of their employment. So it's not no fault. It's a no-fault system. The employee just has to be injured while acting in the scope of their employment, and it'll be that exclusive remedy to that loss for the most part. Again, it's different from state to state as to all the variables, so you have to pay attention depending on what state you are in. Again, the definition of an employee can change from state to state. When there's an independent contractor involved, there are some specific things that you need to look at in your state or the IRS to determine whether or not you need to be covering that independent contractor on your policy or not. Because if not, you might be surprised at the end of the policy period when there is a workers' compensation audit. There's two parts to a workers' compensation policy, Part A or Part 1, which is workers' compensation. It provides those payments due to the injury, right? So the medical benefits, so it pays all the medical expenses related to the injury. There's no financial or time limitation in the policy. So all medical care as determined by the doctors. And then it pays the compensation benefits. So the wage replacement, it pays a certain amount based on the employee's time at the time of the injury for a certain length of time. And there's a lot of rules and regulations on that depending on the state, but it does reimburse some of that lost compensation. And then typically, there is a death or dependent benefit paid out in the event of death, including a fixed cost for burial and potential payments to a spouse up until certain points and dependent children up until certain points. So Part A pays those costs that come directly out of the injury. Part 2 or Part B is the employer's liability. Should there be an occasion where the employer was also the manufacturer of the product that caused the injury, and employer's liability lawsuit could be in play. For instance, an aircraft manufacturer, if one of their employees was injured in an aircraft of their company's manufacturer lost, this could be a potential employer's liability issue. If you're a charter operator, this could come up in the same way. If negligence as your company came up, you could be looking at employer's liability, which again is Part 2 of the workers' compensation policy. Again, all states typically have a requirement for employers to carry workers' compensation for their employees. There are obviously exceptions. There's a couple states that have some alternatives. There's a few states that allow an individual, if they're the only sole proprietor, they don't have to carry workers' compensation on themselves. Again, rules are state specific. There are 4 states that are monopolistic states. That is Ohio, Wyoming, North Dakota, and Washington, where you have to buy a policy in their state. And if you're operating in multiple states, you need to make sure your workers' compensation policy covers you in each state where you are doing business. Again, a lot of different issues. If you're in different states, make sure you're talking to your agent about this very carefully. Payroll for workers' compensation policies, premium for workers' compensation policies are based on payroll. Payroll based on the job classification. For instance, clerical workers pay a lower rate it's a lower rate for clerical workers than it is for pilots or ground crew, for instance. And it's premium. It's also loss rated, so higher losses in the category of the business and state and/or this individual business itself could factor it. But it is a payroll basis for the premium, and it is auditable, meaning at the end of the policy period, they will look at what was edited and what was actually paid. And if it was more, you'll pay more premium. If it was less, you'll actually get a credit. So workers' compensation can be typically purchased through an insurance company, but there are other methods such as group self-insurance funds or qualified self-insurance programs. There's assigned risk markets or residual markets for those type of risks that most carriers won't buy. Again, the states have those requirements. We've got the monopolistic states, and even a couple other states have their own alternative programs. So that's just a quick, brief overview of workers' compensation insurance. It's something most businesses are required to carry. And again, this is why workers' compensation type of losses are typically excluded in any other type of insurance policy. Well, that is all for this week. Join us again next time as we continue navigating the waypoints of aviation insurance. Until then, enjoy clear skies and unlimited visibility.
Thanks for listening to the Aviation Insurance Podcast. If you found this episode of value, please share it with someone who would benefit from this information. Don't forget to subscribe in your podcast player so you don't miss any new episodes and to help our show have more impact. This episode is brought to you by Aeris Insurance Solutions, your flight plan for navigating the turbulence of aviation insurance. For more information, visit aerisinsurance.com. That is www.aerisinsurance.com. Disclaimer. These episodes are for educational purposes only, and due to the changing regulatory and legal nature of the business, some information may change over time. Having a well-educated and experienced aviation insurance broker on your team is an absolute requirement to success in business and for managing your aircraft and aviation business risks.